Shabbat shalom, everybody. So I was just informed that the first video I made for Parashat Shoftim does not have any sound. I'm not really sure why, but we'll try this again. Okay, so, and thank you for letting me know. So Parashat Shoftim, before we get into that, as you see, I'm wearing my lei of kukui nuts, and this is in support of what's going on in Hawaii. My wife and I took a trip there about a month and a half ago or so, 2 months ago, and it was an absolute wonderful trip. Not just that we had a good time doing things, but just loved learning about the Hawaiian culture. Very similar to Jewish culture, that everybody helps each other, and you hear this on the news as they're seeing the aftermath of the devastation that these fires wrought, and they're still not really even sure how it happened. They kind of understand why it happened, the dryness, the fact that the, the winds blew the fire all over the place, and the fact that we've had loss of life is absolutely terrible. You know, but again, Hawaii, those people are the native Hawaiians are resilient. They've got a beautiful culture. It involves helping each other. They talk about that the land is there for everyone's use. They don't own it; they lease it from the divine. Very similar to Torah. It's really nice, and I'm sure that whatever you can do to help and to honor these people and help them in their time of need. We also believe in tzedakah, so and we wish them the best, and let's see what we can do to help Hawaii get on their feet. Lahaina was it was historically it was like the capital of Hawaii. And, my wife and I went there. They have this beautiful, it's called a banyan tree, where it's a very large tree, and it doesn't just root in certain places, but it's like it's got multiple trunks. It's a very interesting tree. So, uh, unfortunately, okay. So anyway, Parsha Shoftim, Shoftim v'Shodrim. Now, Shoftim is the Hebrew word for judges. Shodrim is the Hebrew word for officers. In modern Hebrew, Shodrim means policemen. So these are people, obviously, that were there to uphold the declarations, the rulings of the court. And what's interesting as well is it seems like you might have two different words for judges in Hebrew. And the other word, you might be hard pressed to think about it or consider it, is the word Elohim. How is Elohim the word for judge? Well, in Judaism, we talk about Adonai Elohim, or Hashem Elohim, if you want to be pure about it. So, Yudhe Vavhe, Hashem, Adonai, is God's aspect of the right hand of mercy. Elohim, or Elohim, if you will, is God's aspect of the left hand of judgment. And that is how Elohim becomes the word for judges. But it's a different context. Shotrim is really kind of a earthly judge, an unearthly court. Elohim is a more conceptual judgment. Think of it that way. Elohim is from the idea that it was God's aspect of judging, is also a word that it's a generic word for gods with a little g, affecting judgment. In the book of Bereshit, of Genesis, they have a verse that says that the sons of gods, that's how it's interpreted, B'nai Elohim, took Batot Ishim, the daughters of man, as their wives. And that's how it's interpreted. However, most of the sages will agree that there's nothing supernatural about this. The sons of Elohim were the sons of the rulers, who judged people. The princes who felt like they had this entitlement from their royalty, so they could basically do what they want, because that's what kings and princes did back then. They decreed. They had laws not based on some divine judgment or some divine dictum, but rather because of what they felt they wanted to do. They didn't believe, that there was a divine system of justice. So in a sense, and this is kind of the way I look at it, if you look at Kabbalah, the Sephirah, the aspects that have held the process with which God manifests the universe, the blueprint of creation, if you will. I would suggest that Elohim refers to the judgment of the topper sphere, which is closer to God, which is God's rule, the crown and the wisdom and the knowledge, whereas the Shoftim, or the judgments there, are really the lower spheres, the ones that interact with us more as in the material universe. So your Malchut, your Sud, that brings all of God's manifestation into existence. So consider that way. Now, what we have as well, and this is a real important portion because it emphasizes the fact that this generation that's going to conquer and settle the land, very important to set up a divine and a fair system of courts. So we have within the first few verses that phrase that most of us are familiar with, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. Justice, justice shall you find. Now, sages will talk about the two different tzedek judgments. And this judgment refers to this judgment refers to that. In ancient Hebrew, being the conceptual language that it was, when you see a word doubled like that, that's their way of saying very, or accentuating, highlighting the importance of that concept. And it's at the beginning of the Parsha, and it basically sets the stage for what comes next. That is, you will set up a system of courts. At the top, you have Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, and it was considered that there was a Sanhedrin for every tribe, in every tribal area, territory. And you would have lower courts that handled lesser and less things. The Sanhedrin was more for interpreting Torah, for example. So then you had the Beit Din, the lowest court, the minor court, the lessest, how would you say lessest? I don't know. The most minor court. How about that? Not that they were any less important, but they handled the day-to-day stuff, like making sure that divorce documents, for example, that's the Talmud Daf Yomi, the page of the day that we're studying these days, is the decree for divorce in order. Somebody wants to challenge it. Then the court of three, which is the Beit Din, 3 elders, would decide that. If it was more complicated, would go to the next court, and finally up to the Sanhedrin if it was really involved. Very important. So, in terms of the lower earthly court and the higher divine court, there's also another concept. And that is that in order for somebody to be found guilty, you need 2 witnesses that saw him do it, and that can testify that they knew it was wrong. Either they were told, or they said, yeah, I know this is wrong, but I'm going to go steal anyway. And they have to present themselves in court. And unless you have those 2 witnesses that can testify to that, you don't have a case, even if the person's guilty. And by the way, if those 2 witnesses say, yeah, we heard them, they did it, and bam, we're done, and 2 more witnesses come and say, wait a minute, those 2 people, we saw them over there, they were with us. There's no way they could have seen them. Guess what happens to the 2 false witnesses? They get the punishment that the allegedly guilty party would have received had they been found guilty. Now, what if you don't have that? What if you don't have the witnesses? What if you can't prove that the person was wrong, even though everybody knows the person did it? They get off. However, there's the divine court. God knows what you did. God will judge you. So, the other thing is that, very important as well, when there's a king, a native king, not a foreign king. Remember Rome in the last days of Rome, emperors were no longer Roman. They were bringing in people from outside of Rome, and nobody was Roman that could oversee it. Well, that doesn't happen in Judaism. It needs to be an Israelite who is going to be a king, and that king needs to have 2 Torahs, one in the library, one for his personal reference. And if there isn't 2, well, the king has to write at least 1 Torah. And they said by exegesis that if there's one in the library that maybe his father wrote, then that's good for the first one, but the second one still have to write it. You learn by your fingers. You learn by writing. And the king was not just supposed to write it, but the king was supposed to study it all the time. Not instead of doing his kingly duties, his royal duties, but also actually to know Torah so that he was a servant of the people. Melech comes from the word malach, right? That's the word for an angel. What is an angel? A messenger. A messenger of Hashem. Well, a king is a messenger of Torah, of justice. And that's why they had to be up on their Torah. Okay, so I think this is going to work. I'll check the sound, but thank you again for the feedback. Shabbat Shalom. Congratulations to Colin Roth, Chaim Ben Mikhael, who had his bar mitzvah. It was wonderful. He is now part of our community. He counts as a minion. And looking forward to his sisters coming up as well. Thank you very much. Have a good week. Shabbat Shalom.